Chapter 1. Her lungs burned. The frosted air sliced her throat like shattered glass. Blood pounded a frantic rhythm against her eardrums, a cruel reminder that survival demanded everything while offering nothing in return. Odelia's bare feet tore against the frozen roots of the whispering woods. The slave hunters were close. Their hounds bayed, a haunting chorus that promised violence and chains. She scrambled over a decaying log, her tattered dress catching on briars. A branch lashed her cheek. The metallic tang of her own blood touched her tongue. She pushed her aching muscles harder. The snow deepened, slowing her desperate flight. A hound snapped at her heel. She stumbled, collapsing into the freezing powder. They surrounded her. 5 men with cruel eyes and readied nets. Odelia braced for the strike. Instead, the ambient temperature plummeted. The very air seemed to crystallize. Frost crawled up the trunks of the ancient trees in the blink of an eye. A colossal shadow eclipsed the moon. It descended with the force of a falling mountain. It was a nightmare sculpted from ice and moonlight, a terrifying hybrid of feral wolf and scaled dragon. The beast crushed the hunters before they could even draw their blades. Snow turned crimson. The hounds scattered into the darkness, yelping in terror. Odelia squeezed her eyes shut. She waited for the jaws to snap around her waist. The beast lowered its towering head. It did not strike. Instead, it curled its colossal body around her trembling form. A strange, radiant warmth bled from its icy scales, chasing away the freezing bite of the winter night. Bones fractured and realigned. The monstrous shape dissolved. Where the beast had lain, a man now rested in the snow. He was entirely bare, his skin marred by brutal scars and weeping wounds. His chest heaved. He possessed the eyes of an untamed predator, burning with a feral intensity. Ronan fought the agonizing haze of his bloodlust. The curse screamed in his veins, demanding violence. But then he inhaled jasmine and cedar. The scent bypassed his corrupted mind and struck his soul. The beast within him immediately bowed. His mate. Ronan dragged himself across the crimson-stained snow. His calloused fingers dug into Odelia's waist. He pulled her against his battered chest. "Mine," he growled. His voice was a crushed, gravelly rasp. His eyes rolled back. He slumped against her, completely unconscious. Only then did Odelia see the dark, cursed arrow driven deep into his shoulder. Chapter 2. The stone walls of Ethelgard Castle offered little comfort. Odelia sat by the roaring hearth, her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup. Finnick, a tall warrior with a sharp gaze, paced the floor. Tilly, a gentle maid, handed Odelia a warm blanket. They had brought him here. They had dragged the unconscious king through the blizzard, desperate to save him. "You must stay close to him," Finnick had instructed. "The lethal frost only recedes when you are near." Odelia was his living cure. The freezing aura that threatened to entomb the castle melted away in her presence. A loud crash echoed from the adjoining bedchamber. Odelia rushed through the arched doorway. Ronan was awake. He hurled a silver basin across the room, his breathing erratic. The moment his gaze locked onto her, the air cracked with tension. "Get out!" His command was sharp. Odelia did not flinch. She picked up a fresh roll of linen and approached the bed. "Did you not hear me?" Ronan snarled. He stepped back, putting distance between them. "Leave this room. You are fragile. You do not belong here." He spoke with venom, but his body betrayed him. His nostrils flared, taking in her scent. His hands gripped the bedpost so tightly the wood splintered. He pushed her away to hide the terrifying truth. The beast inside him hungered for her with a maddening intensity. He feared his own darkness would consume her. Finnick leaned against the doorframe. "You are a terrible liar, my king host, Tao," he mused. Ronan shot his beta a lethal glare. Odelia ignored them both. Since she could not speak, she let her actions answer. She poured a bowl of hot broth. She stepped directly into his personal space, holding the spoon steady. Ronan stared down at her. The anger in his eyes fractured, revealing a profound, agonizing conflict. He wanted to shield her from the monster he became. Yet the thought of her walking out that door made his chest physically ache. Night descended over Ethelgard. The shadows lengthened. The curse awoke. Odelia was asleep in her assigned quarters when the door shattered off its iron hinges. Ronan lunged into the room. The ice dragon's madness had overtaken his mind. He pinned her to the mattress, his weight absolute. His eyes were vacant, glowing with an unnatural frost. He lowered his head. Razor-sharp claws extended from his fingertips, hovering a fraction of an inch over her delicate throat. Chapter 3. The claws pricked her skin. A single drop of blood welled at the surface. Odelia did not fight. She did not thrash against his crushing weight. Instead, she lifted her trembling hands. Her soft palms pressed against his hardened cheeks. She looked up at him, her eyes pools of endless, quiet compassion. Ronan froze. The warmth of her touch seeped through the icy madness. Her silent empathy struck deeper than any weapon. The beast retreated. Ronan gasped, his forehead dropping to rest against her shoulder as he fought for control. An unspoken treaty was formed in the dark. Odelia became his anchor. She grounded him when the curse threatened to pull him under. Finnick and Tilly noticed the shift. They took matters into their own hands. The next evening, Odelia found herself locked inside the grand library. Ronan stood across the room, glaring at the heavy oak doors. "Finnick has a death wish," Ronan muttered. The romantic tension in the enclosed space was suffocating. The scent of aged parchment mixed with his natural aroma of rain, pine, and faint blood. Odelia walked toward a towering shelf, reaching for a dusty tome. The spine was too high. Ronan stepped in behind her. His chest brushed against her back. The sudden contact sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. He reached over her head, effortlessly retrieving the book. He did not step back. He leaned down, his face burying into the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply. Odelia's pulse hammered against her ribs. She turned in his arms. Her lips were mere inches from his. His gaze dropped to her mouth, his restraint slipping away. The library doors burst open. 4 men in crimson robes stormed the room. The Council of Elders. The lead elder held a jagged brass compass, the dark meter. The needle spun violently, pointing directly at Odelia. "Seize her," the elder commanded. "She harbors dark magic. She is a spy for the Deadlands." Chapter 4. She burns tonight. The elders surrounded them, their faces twisted with self-righteous fury. Ronan stepped in front of Odelia. He shielded her entirely from their view. "Touch her, and I will sever your hands from your wrists. She has bewitched you, King Ronan," the lead elder shouted. "The meter does not lie. Her blood reeks of ancient magic. She must be purged." The confrontation escalated into chaos. Swords were drawn. Ronan moved with lethal precision, disarming 2 guards in a single breath. But the elders had planned for this. A traitor hidden among the castle guard stepped from the shadows. He hurled a poisoned longsword straight at Ronan's unprotected back. Odelia saw the blade cutting through the air. She threw herself into its path. The steel tore through her chest. She collapsed against Ronan. He caught her, his roar of anguish shaking the castle foundations. but there was no blood. Instead, a blinding, incandescent light erupted from the wound. The steel blade shattered into ash. The magic that had kept her mute for 15 years fractured and broke. The silence had never been an injury. It was an ancient seal designed to hide her true nature. She was the last incarnation of the Sun Priestess. The divine energy surged through her veins. The wound sealed itself instantly. Odelia tilted her head back. For the first time in 15 years, she screamed. The sound carried the pure, devastating power of a goddess. The shockwave of golden light blasted the elders backward, knocking them unconscious. But the flare of divine magic acted as a beacon. The sky outside the windows turned an abyssal black. Reality tore open. A portal to the Deadlands yawned above the castle. A colossal, shadowy hand reached through the void. It crashed through the stone ceiling, closing its dark fingers around Odelia. "Ronan!" she cried out, her newly restored voice ringing with terror. "Odelia!" Ronan leaped for her hand. His fingers brushed hers. The shadowy grip tightened. She was ripped into the portal, vanishing into the abyss before his desperate eyes. Chapter 5. The loss of his mate broke the final tether on Ronan's humanity. He surrendered completely to the beast. He shifted into his ultimate form, a towering, invincible fusion of ice dragon and dire wolf. The temperature in the courtyard plummeted to absolute zero. Finnick drew his twin blades, a grim smirk on his face. "I always hated the heat," Finnick joked, though his eyes were deadly serious. They stormed the Deadlands. The blackened plains swarmed with skeletal hounds and dark wraiths. Ronan tore through them like a blizzard, freezing and shattering everything in his path. Finnick guarded his flank, carving a bloody path toward the obsidian spire. At the pinnacle of the tower, Malachor, the Lord of the Deadlands, stood over a dark altar. He was actively draining the golden light from Odelia's chest. She lay restrained by magical chains, her breathing shallow, her glow fading. Ronan crashed through the ceiling. He reverted to his human form, drawing his great sword. He lunged at Malachor. The Dark Lord laughed, conjuring a massive spike of concentrated shadow. He hurled it directly at Odelia's weakened form. Ronan threw his body over hers. The shadow spike impaled him, piercing his armor and driving deep into his gut. He collapsed beside her, coughing up dark blood. The magical chains dissolved as Malachor's focus shifted. Odelia scrambled to Ronan's side. She pulled his head into her lap. Tears streamed down her face. "Do not leave me," she sobbed. Her voice was a beautiful, desperate melody. "I love you. I should have shown you sooner. I love you." She leaned down. She pressed her lips to his. She channeled the last reserves of her sun magic directly into his dying body. The kiss transferred the pure divine light into his corrupted veins. The mate bond awakened in full force. A shockwave of energy blasted through the room. Ronan's eyes snapped open. The dull frost in his irises vanished, replaced by a radiant, burning gold. Malachor snarled. He materialized directly above them, driving a dark halberd down in a lethal arc. The blade drove straight through Ronan's back, piercing them both. Chapter 6. The dark halberd did not kill them. Inside their connected bodies, the pure sun magic met the ancient ice curse. The two opposing forces did not destroy each other. They merged. The divine light purified the frost, creating an unstoppable surge of energy. The halberd shattered into dust. Ronan rose to his feet, pulling Odelia up with him. He did not even draw his sword. He simply raised his hand. A wave of absolute purified frost exploded outward. It hit Malachor, instantly flash-freezing the Dark Lord into a glittering statue of ice. Ronan snapped his fingers. the statue shattered into a million harmless pieces. The dark kingdom crumbled around them. The curse was broken. The silence was gone. Ronan turned to Odelia. They stood in the center of the collapsing ruins. He dropped to one knee amidst the rubble and ash. He looked up at her, his golden eyes wide and vulnerable. "Forgive my cruelty," his voice trembled. "Forgive my arrogance. You are my light. You are my cure. Be my Luna. Be my queen." Odelia smiled, pulling him up by the lapels of his ruined armor. She answered him with a kiss that promised eternity. The coronation at Ethelgard was a spectacle of light and joy. Sunlight bathed the ancient stone walls, chasing away the eternal winter. Odelia stood on the balcony, radiant in a gown of spun gold, her laughter echoing through the courtyard as she leaned against her Alpha King. Down in the lower halls, Finnick leaned on a mop, watching the royal couple from a distance. Tilly stood beside him carrying a bucket. "Do you have any idea," Finnick muttered, exhausted, "how many ice blocks I had to chip out of the armory while those two were playing their little game of denial?" Tilly laughed, bumping her shoulder against his. "Just be glad it's melting now." Up on the balcony, Ronan wrapped his arms around Odelia's waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of jasmine and cedar. She belonged to him, body and soul, and for the first time in his life, the king felt entirely, perfectly warm. Would you have saved him, or left him to die? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to see what happens when she walks into that castle, hit subscribe now, because Chapter 2 gets dangerous. Chapter 2, The Journey to Ethelgard Castle, was a fractured blur of biting wind and crushing exhaustion. Odelia's bare, bloodied feet left a grim trail across the frozen courtyard. The fortress loomed against the night sky, an imposing monolith of black stone and creeping ice. Finnick, a towering warrior with eyes like chipped flint, had found them half buried in the snowdrift. He hauled the unconscious king over his broad shoulders, barking urgent orders that echoed off the obsidian walls. Tilly, a maid with trembling hands, wrapped a thick woolen blanket around Odelia's shivering frame. The castle interior felt like a tomb. It was choked by an unnatural frost that coated the iron chandeliers and glittering spikes. "You must remain by his side," Finnick instructed. His voice was tight with suppressed panic. "The lethal ice only recedes when you share his space." She was his living remedy. The suffocating cold that threatened to entomb the entire fortress melted into a breathable warmth whenever she drew near the injured king. She sat by the roaring hearth in his private chambers, her hands tightly wrapped around a porcelain cup. The scent of burning pine mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of his blood. A violent crash echoed through the room. Wood splintered with a deafening crack. Metal shattered against stone. Odelia rushed toward the colossal four-poster bed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Ronan was awake. He stood beside the ruined remains of a silver wash basin, his chest heaving with violent exertion. The dark arrow wound was now wrapped in pristine white linen, but a web of black veins pulsed beneath his golden skin. The moment his burning feral gaze locked onto her small frame, the air cracked with lethal tension. Frost immediately began to bloom across the floorboards beneath his bare feet. "Get out." The command was sharp. It sliced through the room like a physical blade. Odelia did not flinch. She picked up a fresh roll of bandages from the floor and took a steady step forward. "Did you not hear me?" Ronan snarled. He backed away as if she were the apex predator. "Leave this chamber immediately. You are fragile. You do not belong in this frozen wasteland. His words dripped with venom, yet his body betrayed the vicious lie. His nostrils flared, drinking in her intoxicating scent of jasmine and cedar. The fragrance cut through the metallic stench of his own blood. His hands gripped the carved bedpost so tightly the ancient oak fractured under his colossal strength. He pushed her away to conceal a terrifying truth. The beast beneath his skin hungered for her with a maddening, visceral intensity. The wolf wanted to claim her. The dragon wanted to hoard her. He feared his own shadowed soul would consume her brilliant light. Finnick leaned casually against the arched doorframe, watching the exchange. "You are a profoundly terrible liar, my king." The Beta mused, crossing his muscular arms. "Your pulse is racing loud enough to wake the dead." Ronan shot his second-in-command a lethal warning glare. A low, rumbling growl vibrated deep within his chest. Odelia ignored them both. Cursed with a silent tongue, she allowed her actions to speak the words she could not voice. She moved to the hearth and poured a steaming bowl of spiced broth from the iron kettle. She stepped directly into the Alpha's personal space. The sheer size of him was intimidating, but she held the wooden spoon perfectly steady. Ronan stared down at her pale, determined face. The towering anger in his golden eyes fractured. It revealed a profound and agonizing conflict. He desperately wanted to shield her from the frozen monster he was destined to become. Yet the mere thought of her walking out that iron-bound door made his chest physically ache. Odelia reached up. Her soft fingertips brushed against the linen wrapped around his shoulder. Ronan sucked in a harsh breath. The biting frost coating the floorboards instantly melted into small pools of water. His racing heartbeat steadied beneath her gentle touch. He needed her radiant warmth to survive. He craved her presence just to breathe. Night descended over Ethelgard like a suffocating shroud. The shadows lengthened across the cold stone corridors. Deep within the king's blood, the ancient curse awoke, demanding retribution. Odelia was fast asleep in her assigned quarters when the temperature plummeted. The thick wooden door shattered completely off its iron hinges, sending splinters flying across the dark room. Ronan lunged into the pitch-black space. The ice dragon's madness had entirely eclipsed his rational mind. He crashed onto the mattress, pinning her slender body beneath his crushing absolute weight. Odelia gasped. Her eyes flew open in the silent dark. His gaze was completely vacant, glowing with an unnatural predatory frost. He lowered his massive head, his breathing harsh and rapid against her cheek. The wild scent of winter and danger enveloped her. Razor-sharp claws extended from his fingertips with a sickening slide of bone. The lethal tips hovered a mere fraction of an inch over her delicate, pulsing throat. Chapter 3. The lethal tips of his claws hovered a mere fraction of an inch over her delicate, pulsing throat. A single drop of crimson welled where a razor-sharp talon grazed her collarbone. Odelia did not scream. She did not thrash against his crushing, absolute weight. The feral beast demanded absolute fear, but she offered none. Slowly she lifted her trembling hands in the pitch-black room. Her soft palms found his hardened, ice-cold cheeks. She looked up at him through the terrifying darkness. Her eyes were pools of endless, quiet compassion. She anchored him in the violent present. Ronan froze. The radiant warmth of her touch seeped through his icy madness. The feral glow in his golden irises fractured and dimmed. He blinked rapidly, the monstrous fog finally clearing from his corrupted mind. He saw the tiny drop of blood on her pale skin. The metallic scent hit his heightened senses, snapping the last threads of the curse's control. A fractured gasp tore from his throat. He threw himself off the mattress. He stumbled backward until his broad shoulders hit the freezing stone wall. The sheer horror of what he had almost done radiated through their unspoken connection. His chest heaved with profound self-loathing. He fled the bedchamber without a single word, leaving only the scent of winter and bitter regret. From that terrifying night, a silent treaty was forged. Odelia became his absolute anchor in the storm. The suffocating winter within Ethelgard slowly began to thaw. Ice melted from the iron chandeliers. The ancient hearths burned with a welcoming golden heat, but the romantic tension between the haunted king and his quiet savior only grew hotter. Finnick and Tilly noticed the unbearable magnetic pull. They took matters into their own capable hands. The next evening, the heavy oak doors of the grand library slammed shut. A heavy iron lock clicked firmly from the outside. "Finnick has a definitive death wish, Beau," Ronan muttered. He glared at the sealed exit. Odelia stood near the center of the towering room. The scent of aged parchment mixed perfectly with his imposing aroma of rain and cedar. The forced proximity was an exquisite torture. She walked toward a towering wooden shelf, reaching for a leather-bound tome. It was placed entirely too high. Ronan stepped in behind her. He moved with the silent grace of an apex predator. His broad chest brushed against her spine. The sudden, electrifying contact sent a jolt of heat straight down her limbs. Her breath hitched. He reached over her head, effortlessly retrieving the book from the top shelf. He did not step back. He leaned down, his face burying into the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, drawing her sweet jasmine scent into his lungs. The ferocious dragon within him purred in absolute contentment. Odelia's pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She turned slowly in his arms. Her lips were mere inches from his. Ronan studied her face in the flickering candlelight. He traced the elegant line of her jaw with infinite care. The calluses on his thumb scraped gently against her soft skin. He looked into her expressive eyes and saw the profound depth of her silent trauma. Her muteness was not a simple injury. It was a brutal, intentional scar left by a shadowed past. A dark vow formed in his heart. He would find whoever stole her beautiful voice. He would tear them apart piece by bleeding piece. His gaze dropped to her parted mouth. His legendary restraint finally shattered. He tilted her chin up, leaning in to claim the kiss that had been burning between them for days. The magnetic pull was completely undeniable. She closed her eyes, entirely willing to surrender to the consuming heat of her alpha. The library doors burst open with a deafening crash. 4 men in crimson robes stormed the room. The council of elders had arrived. The lead elder held a jagged brass compass in his skeletal hands. It was the dark meter. The enchanted needle spun violently, glowing with a sinister violet light. It pointed directly at Odelia's chest. "Seize the girl," the elder commanded, his voice dripping with righteous fury. "She harbors dark magic. She is a spy for the Deadlands." Chapter 4. The metallic tang of blood overpowered the crisp scent of pine. Kaylin's colossal frame was a dead weight against her side. Ilara strained with every step, her boots slipping on the blood-slicked ice as she dragged the Alpha King back into the desolate keep. The silver poison was working fast. Black veins spider-webbed up his neck, standing out starkly against his pale skin. He was dying. The beast who had torn 3 rogue shifters to shreds to protect her was currently bleeding out on the cold stone floor of the grand hall. Ilara dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands shook as she tore away the ruined fabric of his tunic. The wound was deep, oozing a foul, dark liquid. Silver was a death sentence for his kind. She knew the brutal arithmetic of survival in the north. A wise captive would let the beast perish. A wise girl would take this chance to run. Alara pressed her hands against the wound to staunch the bleeding. She was not a wise girl. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice echoing in the cavernous hall. She scrambled toward her hidden cache of herbs, gathered from the frozen gardens. Yarrow root, bitterweed, and dried kingsfoil. She crushed them between two stones, the sharp, acrid smell of the paste burning her nose. When she returned to his side, Kaelin's breathing was alarmingly shallow. His skin, usually burning with that unnatural feral heat, was like glacial ice. The silver was freezing him from the inside out. Alara applied the bitter poultice directly into the torn flesh. Kaelin let out a low, guttural sound, his body arching off the stone. His eyes snapped open. The gold irises were cloudy, unfocused, and wild with delirium. Alara. His voice was a broken rasp. It was the first time he had spoken her name. It sent a sudden jolt straight to her heart. "I have to draw the poison out," she told him firmly. "You are freezing." She needed to elevate his core temperature, but the hearth was too far, and the fire was dead. There was only one way. It violated every rule of self-preservation she had ever been taught. With trembling fingers, Alara stripped off her snow-soaked cloak and the thick wool of her outer dress. The freezing air bit at her bare arms, but she ignored it. She dragged the heavy furs from a nearby chair, piling them over Kaelin's imposing frame. Then, taking a steadying breath, she slid beneath the pelts and pressed her body flush against his. The shock of his icy skin made her gasp. She wrapped her arms around his broad chest, tangling her legs with his, offering every ounce of her own body heat to the dying king. Minutes bled into hours. The storm raged outside, rattling the iron-wrought windows. Beneath the furs, the space grew suffocatingly intimate. Alara listened to the erratic, thundering rhythm of his heart against her ear. She felt the lethal tension in his muscles begin to ease as the herbs did their work. Slowly, the glacial chill of his skin receded. The feral heat returned, washing over her like a summer fire. Kaelin shifted in his delirium, his arm coming around her waist. He pulled her closer, his face burying into the curve of her neck. Alara stopped breathing. She was trapped beneath his towering form, utterly at his mercy. His nose brushed against her pulse point. A deep, resonant inhale vibrated through his chest. He was waking up. Kaelin stiffened. The golden eyes that met hers were no longer cloudy. They were piercing, lucid, and fixed on her face with a hunger that made her pulse race. He looked down at their tangled bodies, taking in her bare shoulders and the possessive grip he had on her waist. She expected him to shove her away. She expected the cold, detached monster who hid in the shadows. Instead, Kaelin let out a ragged breath and pulled her impossibly tighter. He buried his face back into the hollow of her throat, his lips pressed against her racing pulse, not as a threat, but as a surrender. "You foolish, brave girl," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with raw emotion. "You were dying," Alara whispered, her hands tentatively resting on his broad shoulders. "I should have died." His grip tightened, his fingers trembling where they held her. "Do you know why I stay in the shadows? Why I never come near you in the light?" Alara shook her head, unable to speak over the pounding of her heart. "Now the curse in my blood," Kaelin confessed, his breath searing her collarbone. "It makes me crave you to the point of absolute madness. Every scent, every sound you make tears at my control. I stayed away because I would rather burn from the inside out than let my beast tear you apart." He lifted his head, his golden eyes locking onto hers with devastating vulnerability. But now, I do not think I can let you go. Chapter 5. The air beneath the thick pelts turned scalding and dense. Outside, the blizzard battered the stone walls of Obsidian Keep with relentless fury. Inside, the world had shrunk to the friction of skin and the primal drum of 2 racing heartbeats. Kaelin's feral heat radiated through the dark, wrapping around Alara like a physical tether. She could scarcely draw breath. To be this close to the beast was madness. To surrender to the instinct unspooling in her blood was something far more dangerous. He was a creature utterly starved of touch. Decades of isolation had turned his restraint into a brittle, fractured thing. His large, calloused hands moved over her bare shoulders with an agonizing reverence. His touch was a whisper of fire. She felt the rigid tension in his colossal frame. He was fighting his own ruthless nature to keep from crushing her. Alara did not pull away. Instead, she arched closer to his warmth. Her fingers drifted upward, tracing the brutal tapestry of scars across his chest. He let out a low, vibrating rumble that resonated deep within her ribs. "You are so fragile," Kaelin breathed. His voice was a dark, velvet rasp against her collarbone. "I could break you without even trying." "Then do not break me," she challenged softly. Her quiet courage shattered the last of his iron defenses. Kaelin shifted, his imposing weight pinning her firmly against the mattress. His golden eyes burned through the dim light, stripping away her lingering fears. His mouth trailed along her jawline, inhaling her scent like a starving man offered a sudden feast. He smelled of pine, winter frost, and danger. The friction of his coarse hair against her sensitive skin sent a jolt of pure lightning down her spine. He kissed her. It was not a gentle exploration. It was a raw, desperate claiming of breath and soul. Alara answered with equal fervor, her hands tangled in his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer. Her body yielded completely to his dominant strength. The cold, calculating Alpha King was gone, replaced by a male entirely consumed by the woman beneath him. His lips moved lower, blazing a trail of fire down her neck. She felt the sharp, lethal scrape of his fangs against her racing pulse point. "Mine!" his wolf snarled within his chest. The word was a physical force, a vibration that settled deep in her core. Alara gasped, her eyes fluttering shut. She was ready. Her hands gripped his broad shoulders in silent permission. She wanted the wild, ancient magic of the bond to snap into place. She wanted his mark. His jaw opened. The lethal tips of his fangs pressed into her delicate flesh. A single drop of blood welled up, tasting of copper and absolute surrender. Then the silence shattered. A deafening brassy note tore through the night, vibrating through the stone floors. The war horns of Obsidian Keep wailed in sharp warning. Kaelin froze. His golden eyes snapped wide with lethal clarity, the haze of desire vanishing in an instant. The heavy wooden doors of the great hall rattled violently on their hinges. Outside, the piercing shouts of men cut through the howling wind. It was not a rogue attack. Alara recognized the distinct rhythmic war drums echoing up the mountain pass. They were the drums of her own bloodline. Her family had not come to save her. They had breached the lower gates. Chapter 6. The scent of burning pine and rusted iron flooded the chamber. Kaelin tore himself away. His chest heaved with denied instinct. The war horns blasted a second time, vibrating through the glacial stone beneath their feet. He looked down at Alara, his golden eyes battling the beast within. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a lethal rumble. "Bar the doors. "Let no one in." He did not wait for her answer. He grabbed his broadsword from the mantle. In a blur of motion, the Alpha King vanished into the dark corridors. Alara sat up, pulling the thick furs around her shivering shoulders. She listened to the chaos erupting outside. The clash of steel rang through the courtyard. Shouts of dying men echoed against the mountainside. Her pulse thrummed wildly against her ribs. They had not come to rescue her. She knew her family's ruthless ambition too well. Her uncle did not waste troops on discarded daughters. He wanted the catacombs beneath Obsidian Keep. He needed her royal blood to break the ancient ward sealing the vault. She was merely a key to be used and discarded. Alara refused to play the victim. She pushed herself off the bed, her bare feet hitting the freezing stone. She found Kaylin's discarded hunting dagger. The hilt felt cold and reassuring in her grip. She slipped out of the chamber, creeping through the shadowed halls. The fortress groaned under the assault. Dust fell from the vaulted ceilings. She reached the great hall just as the oak doors splintered inward. Snow blew into the room, followed by a dozen armored soldiers. Her uncle stood among them, his silver-tipped sword gleaming in the torchlight. "Find the girl," he ordered. "Bleed her on the vault doors." Alara moved with silent precision. She cut the ropes holding the iron chandeliers. They crashed down, crushing 3 soldiers under twisted metal. She lunged from the shadows, her dagger finding the unprotected neck of a 4th man. Blood sprayed hot across her face. She did not flinch. She spun away, dodging a lethal sword thrust. Then, Kaylin returned. He burst through the ruined doors like an avenging god. His dark hair was matted with crimson. His imposing frame moved with a devastating feral grace. He tore through the remaining soldiers, snapping bone and severing limbs. He stopped, his chest heaving, and looked at Alara. She stood amidst the carnage, her face painted with enemy blood, her dagger raised. He did not see a fragile sacrifice. He saw his equal, but the distraction cost them. Her uncle lunged from the debris, grabbing Alara from behind. A silver blade pressed tight against her throat. "Drop the sword, wolf," her uncle sneered. Kaylin froze, his golden eyes locked onto the silver biting into Alara's skin. A single drop of her blood spilled, running down the blade. The Alpha King, the towering beast of the north, let his weapon clatter to the stone. Slowly, deliberately, he sank to his knees. Chapter 7. The great hall fell dead silent. The undisputed ruler of the north knelt on the blood-soaked floor. He offered his life for hers without a single moment of hesitation. "Pathetic," her uncle spat. He tightened his grip on Alara's hair. Alara met Kaylin's gaze. She saw the absolute devotion burning in his golden eyes. She felt the phantom ache of the bond waiting to snap into place. She would not let him die for her. She slammed her heel backward, shattering her uncle's instep. As he flinched, she sank her teeth into his wrist, tasting bitter sweat and leather. He howled, dropping the silver knife. That fraction of a second was all Kaylin needed. He erupted from the floor. He closed the distance faster than human eyes could track. His hand clamped around the man's throat, lifting him entirely off the ground. With one brutal, sickening twist, the threat was eliminated. The body crumpled to the stone. Silence rushed back into the ruined hall. Kaylin turned to Alara. His chest rose and fell in jagged, uneven breaths. He crossed the space between them and dropped to his knees again, pulling her down with him into the wreckage. His large hands framed her face, frantic and trembling. He searched her eyes, his thumbs wiping the enemy blood from her cheek. "You are reckless," he breathed, his voice a fractured whisper. "I am yours," she answered fiercely. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent like a drowning man finding air, the scent of winter, copper, and adrenaline wrapped around them. "You knelt for me," she murmured, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "I would burn this world to ash for you," Kaelin promised. He lifted his head, his gaze intensely focused. The feral heat of his skin warmed her trembling body. There was no hesitation left in him, no fear of his own beast. He tilted her chin, exposing her throat. His lips brushed the very spot where the silver blade had rested. The touch was exquisitely gentle. Then his fangs grazed her pulse point. She gasped, arching into his embrace. He bit down, deep and true. A brilliant, searing heat exploded through her veins. The mating bond snapped into place, anchoring their souls together. She felt his raw, unapologetic love flood her mind. She tasted his devotion. Elara clung to his broad shoulders as the euphoric rush settled into a deep, humming warmth. Outside, the storm finally broke. Moonlight pierced the shattered windows, casting a silver glow over the blood-stained stone. Kaelin gathered her into his arms, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. He carried his queen through the ruins of Obsidian Keep, leaving the shadows behind them forever. Chapter 7. The marble floor stained crimson beneath my torn knees. Smoke choked the grand hall, bitter and thick. The usurper's body lay broken near the shattered throne. It was over. The rebellion was dead, but the true danger remained. In the center of the wreckage stood the beast. Kaelin was no longer a king. He was a creature of myth and slaughter. Midnight fur bristled along his towering spine. His lethal claws dug deep gouges into the ancient stone. He paced in jerky, unpredictable circles. His amber eyes held no recognition, only the raw, blinding instinct to kill. "Kaelin," I whispered. My voice cracked. His head snapped toward the sound. A low, vibrating snarl rolled through his chest. It rattled the loose glass in the tall windows. He lowered his imposing frame, muscles coiling like a sprung trap. He was going to attack. The feral curse had swallowed him whole. Surviving guards lingered near the heavy oak doors. They raised their silver-tipped crossbows with shaking hands. "Do not shoot," I commanded, scrambling to my feet. My bruised ribs screamed in protest. I stepped between the deadly weapons and the feral wolf. The cold draft from the broken windows whipped my ruined silk dress. "My lady, he is gone," the captain warned. "He will tear you apart. Lower your weapons," I repeated softly. "He is my mate." I turned my back on the guards. I faced the monster who had slaughtered an army to keep me breathing. Kaelin snarled, a terrifying sound of sheer violence. He lunged. He closed the distance in a single terrifying heartbeat. I did not flinch. I did not run. I dropped to my knees before him. His colossal jaws snapped shut mere inches from my throat. Hot copper-scented breath washed over my face. I looked directly into his wild, golden eyes. I offered no resistance. I tilted my chin back, willingly exposing the fragile pulse point of my neck. "I am here," I breathed into the icy air. "I am yours." The beast froze. His lethal jaws hovered over my skin. A confused, fractured whine broke from his throat. "Take it," I urged, gently. I lifted a trembling hand. I buried my fingers into the thick, dark fur at the nape of his neck. "Claim me, Kaelin. Come back to me." The feral instinct warred with the soul of the man. I felt the violent tremor shake his towering frame. Then he pressed his wet nose against my collarbone. He inhaled deeply. My scent, rainwater, and fear and absolute devotion filled his lungs. His teeth grazed my skin. A shiver of pure anticipation raced down my spine. He bit down. Pain flared. sharp and brilliant like a struck match, but the pain vanished instantly, replaced by a surge of liquid fire. The mate bond roared to life. It struck my heart like lightning. His soul crashed into mine. I felt his overwhelming terror, the suffocating darkness of the feral curse, and then the blinding, desperate love he harbored for me. Mine, the word echoed in my mind, fiercely possessive. Yours, I answered silently, wrapping my arms around his broad neck. The monstrous wolf form began to ripple. Moonlight twisted around his shifting bones. When the blinding light faded, a man knelt before me. Kalen's chest heaved. Sweat slicked his tanned skin. His dark hair clung to his forehead. He looked exhausted, wrecked, and completely human. His amber eyes were clear. They shone with unshed tears. "Elara," he choked out. His calloused hands framed my face. "You brought me back. You saved me." "You saved us all," I smiled, leaning into his warm touch. He pulled me against his chest. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply. His strong arms held me like I was his only tether to the earth. The scent of pine and rain surrounded me. The frantic beat of his heart slowed against mine. He scooped me into his arms. He stood effortlessly, ignoring the blood and ruin around us. The guards parted in silent reverence. Kalen carried me out of the freezing hall. We moved into the quiet sanctuary of the royal chambers. The hearth fire burned bright, casting golden light across the stone walls. He set me gently onto the velvet covers. His touch was incredibly soft, treating me like spun glass. He brought a warm, damp cloth. He carefully wiped the soot and dried blood from my skin. His golden eyes tracked every flinch, filled with profound devotion. "I could have hurt you," he whispered. A stray tear escaped his eye. I reached up. I wiped the tear away with my thumb. "But you didn't. The bond held us together." He leaned into my palm. He closed his eyes and breathed me in. The connection between us hummed, vibrant and alive. I could feel his profound relief. He lay down beside me. He pulled me flush against his side. The heat of his skin chased away the remaining winter chill. "I will never let you go," he swore into the quiet room. "I would never let you," I promised. His lips met mine. It was a slow, tender kiss. It carried the weight of our survival and the promise of forever. We stayed there in the golden light, two halves of a single soul, finally at peace. And in the silence that followed, his hand never let go of hers. Some bonds aren't chosen, they're inevitable. And this was only the beginning. If this story stayed with you, leave a like so I know you felt it too. Tell me, what was your favorite moment? And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.